because a little earlier I spoke to Siobhian Brown, the Scottish Minister for Victims and Community Safety. Minister, can we start by clearing up a couple of uncertainties? If I said that non-Christians are bound for hell, I'm not going to ask you to adjudicate on that, but I'd like you to tell me who would decide in the first instance whether that could be hate speech or not?
Okay, if I just may just give you a little bit of history here. Stirring up hatred has been against race for over 40 years in Scotland, England, and Wales. So, just for your specific question there, what this hate crime in Scotland that was enacted yesterday does mean is that it would be an offence to incite hatred, to be abusive and threatening, stirring up hatred towards an individual, which would cause them fear and alarm. If you were just saying that in your house or on your social media, I'm not going to be saying what the Police Scotland would say, but that's your expression, your freedom of expression, which is respected within this bill.
Yeah, but if I can be a little specific, let's say that I said that non-Christians like that Hamza Yusuf are bound for hell, and somebody else, as I understand it, any individual might be able to report me to Police Scotland for a hate crime. Is that true or is it not true?
It would be up if you were causing fear for an individual through your comments. I think we have to be clear here, Trevor, that England and Wales have had stirring up hatred against religion and race for the last 15 years.
Forgive me, I'm just asking a thing about the mechanics of this. I'm not even asking whether such a comment is wrong or not. I'm just asking, would someone be entitled under the new law to report me to the police?
It would be up to if an individual was personally threatened and in fear of your comments and they felt that they wanted to report it, then it would be up to the individual, then it would be up to the police to decide whether or not there was any criminality involved in those comments.
And it wouldn't have to be the person I'd named, and presumably nobody would have to take into account whether I was trying to be funny or whether I really meant it. It's just the words that count. What I'm trying to get clear here is, what is the law actually permitting?
Okay, what the law is doing is we're protecting people from the hatred and prejudice within our communities. So this, as I said previously, this has already been in law for over 40 years for race, and in England and Wales for religion and sexual orientation for the last 15 years. So what we're doing in Scotland...
With respect, as a former chair of the Commission for Racial Equality and the Equality and Human Rights Commission and one of the authors of the 2010 Act, this isn't exactly the same law, because the historic law, the law that we have in England and Wales relating to race, doesn't incorporate specifically the provision that anybody, whether they are involved or not, can report you to the police. And that's what I'm really trying to get at here. Is that the case or not?
If anybody felt threatened, they could report it to Police Scotland. There is a very, very high threshold of criminality because freedom of expression is embedded into the legislation that has been brought into place in Scotland.
Okay, let me ask you another, I suppose, technical but straightforward question. If I say something that is heard in London, but I know that it's going to be heard in Scotland, am I liable to be covered by this legislation as well? Could Police Scotland investigate me in those circumstances? Or do I have to be in Scotland or Scottish?
My understanding, this legislation is for people in Scotland and for crimes that happen in Scotland.
Oh, so the act of hate speech has to be committed in Scotland?
That's my understanding. That's what we've incorporated into the Scottish Act, yes.
Oh, so for example, J.K. Rowling, who says in her tweets, "Arrest me if you dare, but I'm abroad." That actually doesn't count because she says this abroad.
I'm not going to comment on individuals' behaviour or comments. All I'll say is what is in this Hate Crime Act is a protection for people from minority groups with protected characteristics from abuse and from threatening behaviour that would cause them fear or alarm.
The reason that I'm asking all of these questions, I guess, is that I think there's still a little bit of confusion about how this will actually work, who would actually operate it. But there's also a separate question, which is one of priorities. Last year, there were 5,738 hate crimes reported in Scotland. Let's assume that everybody who got reported was prosecuted in some way. Let's say that you get 6,000 next year under this legislation. What guidance are you giving to the police? I'm not saying it's operational, but presumably they have to have some guidance about what is more important than what else. Are you giving them guidance about whether hate speech against age is more important than one against religion, or is it the degree of venom?
No,
What is the story here?
No, they're all protected characteristics under this Act, and that we have been working very closely with Police Scotland throughout bringing in this legislation, and myself with him the last year before it has been introduced on yesterday. But one of the things is they have been given a very clear steer throughout this legislation when it went through Parliament in 2021 about the protection of freedom of expression.
The issue of priorities here seems to me quite an important one. And I just want to put this to you. Most of the conversation, whether you wanted this to be the case or not, has been about speech about sexual identity, trans women, trans men, and so on. I looked at the data for Scotland last year, that is the financial year ending 2023. In that year, there were 55 cases of hate crimes, which had a trans element. That was down from 86 the previous year. Meanwhile, there were 61,934 cases of domestic abuse. The Scottish Government has said that its hoped for legislation on misogyny has to wait while this piece of legislation goes through. 55 versus 61,934. 61,934 have to wait while the 55 gets dealt with. Is that the right order of priorities here?
Yeah, if I could just give you a little bit of history, because this was considered going back in 2021 when the legislation was going through the Scottish Parliament, but the Scottish women's groups at the time did not want to include it. They wanted a further separate bill on coming from the Scottish Parliament. What we did do is that we had Baroness Helena have an independent review, which we took the recommendations forward. And last year we consulted on that to bring through a specific misogyny bill, which will be introduced later this year into
Well,
the
you could have introduced that any time you liked.
But we were
When there were
working with
62,000 as opposed to just over 50 crimes, did you choose the one that affected 50 rather than one that affected 62,000?
No, not at all. And I appreciate that there is very polarized views regarding transgender identity, but we have to remember that this Hate Crime Act does incorporate against age, disability, and the race, religion. So it's not all about transgender.
Yeah,
Women specifically will have misogyny. If I just may finish, Trevor, if I can,
the total of those is about 2,500, as opposed to 62,000 domestic abuse.
Yes, and that's why we really need to have a separate bill, because I also have violence against women and girls, and so we have a separate bill for misogyny moving forward, as we have been listening to our women's group and stakeholders that did not want it included in this Act.
Siobhian Brown, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.